There is really no need for any confusion about the meaning of the word Antichrist in the New Testament. 1 John 2:18 says, "You've heard that Antichrist is coming." That's the title. Antichristos is coming. But let me tell you something else. The spirit of Antichrist is already at work, with an almost predictable tendency of human beings to rush from one extreme to the other. People will discard the future Antichrist and say that all references to Antichrist in the New Testament simply mean the ongoing spirit of Antichrist. This is fundamentally wrong. Yes, the spirit of Antichrist was at work when John wrote. The spirit which is denying the real human Jesus and substituting some ethereal Jesus for the real human Jesus, that was certainly at work. Many such false teachers were there, but the Antichrist has not come yet. This is very clear from Matthew 24. Jesus there gives the Olivet Discourse, in which he gives a very carefully worked sequence of events. It's not a problem until we create the problem. Jesus is asked there about his second coming, his parousia, and the end of the age in Matthew 24. Those are coupled. The parousia, the second coming, the one future splendid arrival of the king to take over his territory, the kingdom of God, is a future event. He's asked about that, coupled with the end of the age. Of course, it's true that in 70 AD there was the destruction of Jerusalem, but it did not result, it was not accompanied by the second coming of Jesus. To imagine that is to fail to understand the gospel of the kingdom entirely. If one doesn't see that the second coming is a visible event, this Jesus, who is now being taken from you visibly into heaven, will so come again. That's utterly clear in Acts 1:11. To miss that is to miss out on the substance of so much of what Jesus taught, including the gospel of the kingdom. So here in Matthew 24, the question is about the parousia. The one parousia and the end of the age is the same thing, coupled but together with one article even there. And the parallels in Mark and Luke say nothing different at all. Yes, the disciples associate trouble in Jerusalem with the second coming. Of course they do, because all the prophets had said that. They'd read Zechariah, which the public unfortunately probably hasn't. So they know that when the Messiah comes in power and glory to take over the reins of government on the earth, they know that that is closely associated with a very closely previously event of trouble in Jerusalem. If they'd read the Septuagint version of Zechariah 12:3, they would have learned that Jerusalem is going to be trodden down for a period of time, trodden underfoot, mocked at. Zechariah 12 verse 3, the Septuagint particularly, which Jesus quotes there, and it's going to be trodden down until the enemy times of the Gentiles are fulfilled, and then all will be put right with the arrival of Jesus. Jesus referred to that same text in Zechariah 12:3 over there in Revelation 11, verse 2 and 3, when he spoke of a period of 3.5 years, bringing it, of course, straight from Daniel, the second half of the future 70th week. The 70th week is not that hard, provided you read 926b properly, where it speaks of the Antichrist, the bad guy, coming to his end in the flood of judgment there. That won't work for Titus. Absolutely not. No, Titus and the invasion of Jerusalem has nothing whatsoever to do with the parousia. That happened. Titus actually died naturally 18 years later. That's not at all what is referred to in Daniel 9:26b. So Keats, his end. See my articles at our site on that subject, Daniel 9:26b. But having said that, then, Jesus referred to the Antichrist as the one sign of the very closely impending end of the age, having described wars and rumors of wars and so on, and trouble for the disciples, persecution and so on. He then gets to the point in Matthew 24, verse 15, when you therefore see. Now that therefore relates immediately to the verse before. He says, then the end will come. The end will only come when the gospel of the kingdom, as properly defined, the gospel about the kingdom has been worldwide preached worldwide all over the world. None of us can measure exactly when that has happened. But when that happens, then finally Jesus said, the end will come when you therefore see. The end here is the seeing of the abomination of desolation, standing where he ought not to. There's a masculine pronoun there, which some translations get right, some do not. I'm referring to Mark 13, verse 14. When you see the abomination of desolation standing where he ought not to, in a holy place, that's exactly what Paul meant by 2 Thessalonians 2, where he speaks of the man of sin, the man of lawlessness, standing in the temple of God. Paul has in mind clearly, as do the prophets, a restored temple, a Jewish temple, yes. That's the beginning of the Jewish story, which leads into the millennial kingdom where the Jews are going to be restored collectively, Romans 9 to 11. So the Antichrist then of 1 John 2:18 is not just the spirit of Antichrist which is ongoing. It is the final Antichrist, standing where he, a singular, masculine, personal pronoun, in Mark 13:14. When you see that, then flee to the mountains with all haste. This hasn't happened yet. It didn't happen in 70 AD. In fact, they fled long before AD 70. In about 66, Eusebius says they fled to the mountains. That was not at all what Jesus is talking about. When Jesus is asked about the second coming, he answered about the second coming. Now, Jesus, of course, himself did not know probably the extent of the times, because he said it's not for you to know the times and seasons. He didn't know the range of times which would follow his own ministry before we get to the second coming. That's not known. But what is known are the final events just before the second coming. And they're signaled then by the appearance in a holy place, in the temple of God, with the article, the temple of God, not a temple of God, as he describes the church and individual Christians when he introduces them as a temple. No, not metaphorically a temple, but in the temple of God, as per Daniel 9. And then Daniel 12, verse 11 is key here, because Daniel then reported facts about the abomination of desolation. Most Christians attempt to define the abomination without any reference to Daniel, exactly what Jesus said not to do. Define your abomination by the facts and data given by Daniel. 12:11 says, from the time that the abomination is set up and the daily sacrifice is taken away, there'll be exactly 1,290 days. That's a little more than the 3.5-year period, which is the second half of the 70th week. That's fixed datum for everybody to look at closely. Otherwise, nobody will be ready for the future. It's highly misleading. It's highly misleading to say that Jesus had come back today. That's exactly what Paul warned against. Some of them were getting terribly upset about some false letter, false teaching, suggesting that nothing had to happen before the parousia. Exactly the opposite is the true situation there. The true situation is that there must appear an abomination of desolation standing in the temple of God, giving us the Great Tribulation time. Following that, immediately after Matthew 24:29, Jesus will come back.